Conservatives are calling for some relief at the pump. Leader Pierre Poilievre wants the government to remove gas taxes for the rest of the year. Poilievre has a solution for paying for it too, by cancelling the Alto high-speed rail project between Toronto and Quebec City.
I'm calling on the government to suspend all fuel taxes for the rest of the year. We call on the government to fund this zero tax on gas proposal by cutting wasteful spending, end the $90 billion Alto train disaster.
For more on these proposals from the opposition, I'm joined by BC Conservative MP and transportation critic Dan Albas. Thanks for joining me. Gas taxes are a major contributor to municipalities in terms of infrastructure and other kind of funding like that. How much would this proposed cut or holiday, gas tax holiday, impact municipalities who so depend not just on the money, this year, but the long-term spending and planning, knowing that that money is coming down the pike?
Well, thanks for the question. So first of all, Conservatives believe that the government needs to be more laser focused on affordability, and that's why we're suggesting to get rid of gas taxes altogether during this period of time. Now, the municipal gas tax, as it used to be called, the gas tax fund, has been switched to community development because it's no longer linked as a one-for-one. So this won't affect municipal infrastructure or municipalities whatsoever because they're given a five-year schedule to go by. But unfortunately, consumers are not given a five-year schedule to go by. They are getting hit at the pumps. And rather than to see their money going to wasteful projects like the Liberal gun grab or this Alto project that I'm sure we'll talk about, they would much rather see money in their pockets so that they can afford to eat. And I've been door knocking in my riding of Okanagan Lake West, South Kelowna. People are seeing that gas price. They also know that eventually this will mean to higher gas or grocery costs because diesel and groceries are highly correlated because of the transportation in such a big country. So Conservatives want to be there, and we want the government to be there as well. And we're pressing the government to do this now while they still can.
Now, you talked about wasteful spending, and that is something that your leader has talked about as how to pay for this gas tax holiday of at least for this year. Do you guys have numbers or calculations that show which projects you consider wasteful and how much money that would offset the costs of taking off the GST and excise tax on fuel?
Well, we've been talking for years about the over-reliance on consultants. That's always going to be there. But look, there's all sorts of programs like I said, the Alto program that's really not actually set up to deliver anything in the next 4 years. They're just hiring contractors effectively to do the design for it. So there are things the government can immediately go to. As we've been saying, we've been very critical of the gun buyback program. Because we believe that those aren't an efficient use of tax dollars. And that's why we think that most Canadians right now would much rather see a reduction at the pumps so that they can afford to eat and heat.
Now, you mentioned the Alto project, which is a perfect segue for me because I did want to ask you about high-speed rail. The 2023 Conservative Party National Convention, in terms of a policy declaration, the party was actually in favor of high-speed light rail. And, for all the reasons why those who are proponents of it now say it's a good thing. But now your party is calling for the cancellation of this project. So can you explain what the change of mind, where that comes from?
I'm happy to. And again, the grassroots basically told us that we should support projects where they are appropriate and also where there is proper risk sharing. As I said, Alto is not a P3, although the government calls it a progressive one. Essentially, it is the taxpayer that is completely funding it. And look, of the 15 projects that the Major Projects Office has received, Alto is one of them, the other 14 are not reliant on taxpayer subsidies. They're largely run by the private sector, risking their own capital. Maybe there are some loans here and there, but largely they are either paid from private sources or they are paid by ratepayers and for energy projects. So Alto stands out as a $90 billion whole that we don't believe is the right use of government funds for. We actually think the government, had they rescoped this and had they actually tried to say, let's pre-permit this, let's set up so that a private entity would want to come here or partner with us, that could have been a different value proposition altogether. Look, if a conservative government was suddenly elected and we were in charge, we definitely would cancel the Alto program, but we'd also be looking to work with provinces so that we could actually start working on some of these regional bottlenecks. If you look at Via Rail, their service levels has dropped while their subsidies have gone up. And there's so many opportunities to work with provinces on linking transit to regional rail. We should be looking to see how we can improve bottlenecks, not create a large monopoly that is bulldozing through communities, not listening, and costing everyone, again, every single taxpayer. So about $8,000 per family of four to pay for this thing if it comes in on budget. And chances are it won't. Right now, the global average for this type of rail projects is about a 44% overage. And that's with contingencies already included. So this is one of those ones where we are going to disagree with the government. But again, on the other 14 projects, we believe that Canada is ready to build again, and we want to be helpful with that, which is why we helped with the legislation. Could the government have gone
Mr.
farther?
Albas, I did want to ask, though, if some of the change in mind on this project for the Conservatives came from feedback that Conservative MPs in rural ridings, for example, who are concerned about land expropriation and division of their land, is some of that objection being carried forward as part of the formula for why the Conservatives are now not in favor of it? And to that, if going forward their concerns are truly taken into account and the route is not as objectionable as right now it seems to be for some, would the possibility of the opposition from the Conservative government go back to support?
So first of all, the motion that was passed at our convention was not for the Alto project in mind. So they were saying we should support rail where appropriate and where there's proper risk taking. Now, look, we listened to members of parliament, we listened to municipalities, and we've been hearing a lot of negative things along that corridor. And look, in a democracy, you're going to have some communities that support it because their situation is different than others. But just the way the government has structured the actual project itself, we believe that there are better ways to more quickly give people more options without putting significant $90 billion. Let's just bear in mind that we're trying to rearm our military. We have an aging population that needs more healthcare, and people are seeing those public services that they rely on deteriorate. Via Rail is a classic example. They're down to 51% of their trains running on time. So I think there's lots of opportunities.
Some would argue that that's why we need high-speed rail. I did want to ask you, though, about the...
That doesn't make sense, Karina, because if you have an existing system that is not performing, why would you throw another monopoly, another crown corporation, and give it $90 billion? Just think of the trade-offs we are making here. We have ports that needs to be more productive. We have, like, for example, I have one member of parliament in Northern Ontario calling for Trans-Canada, the Section 11, a very dangerous road where over 20 people have died in the past, 40 days. Because it's unsafe. So there's lots of priorities. It just seems strange to me that the Liberal government is proceeding with a Justin Trudeau legacy project, and this bears directly down on Mr. Carney and his judgment. And without any real examination, he suddenly makes this a national project. I just find the whole thing curious.
I'm almost out of time, but I just wanted to ask about the criticism, though, of the Conservative position that has come from some saying that this is a double standard, that the party is very much in favor of going forward with a project like a pipeline without stakeholder consensus and without people on board who live along the pipeline, but not for high-speed rail. Can you explain why that's not a double standard?
We live in a democracy, so you're not always going to have 100% of people agreeing on anything. And again, we support 14 of the 15 projects that have been put forward as a national interest projects. But at the end of the day, we want to see things built. We don't think that this project will ever actually get built, and even if it does, it's going to be younger Canadians that are going to be paying that tax bill. So, like, I understand that there's going to be some opposition, but really, what we are saying here is that we don't believe this is in the national interest. We believe that there are better uses of the tax dollars, and in a democracy, I think that's a fair place to land.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. We have to leave it there. That's Conservative transportation critic Dan Albas. Let's talk about this with the Power Panel. Emily Nicolas is a columnist for Le Devoir. Andrew Thompson is a former NDP cabinet minister in Saskatchewan. Peter MacKay is a former Conservative cabinet minister. And here with me, Michelle Cadario was deputy chief of staff to former Prime Minister Paul Martin. Welcome, everyone. Peter, I'm going to start with you. Poilievre says the GST and the excise tax on fuels should be lifted for at least the remainder of 2026. Would that be the right move?
Well, the Conservatives like cutting taxes, and the issue of affordability, that Pierre Poilievre has been beating that drum for some time, and it is resonating with a lot of people, as you showed in your intro, folks who are driving their kids to hockey practice or to school, truck drivers, as he alluded to in that clip. This is adding to this almost conspiratorial impact on consumers that does call for relief, to answer your question. So yes, I think this is an approach that is practical. It's is something that is much like the GST itself. It's a consumer tax that if you use more, you're going to be impacted. And so this roller coaster that we are experiencing because of geopolitics is something that the government of Canada can't really impact. What happens in the Straits of Hormuz, in other words, is not something that the Liberal government is going to be able to address. This is an approach. I wouldn't call it particularly novel. I think it's something that other provinces have looked at. I know that Carrie Lynn Finlay, for example, in BC is taking a similar approach in her leadership bid. So it's something that has appeal to people who are feeling this pinch at the pumps. And it is something that the government can do now, although it's sunsetted, as I understand it, from what the Conservatives are asking. It would last for the balance of 2026.
Now, Peter said, Michelle, that it's not a novel idea. And the Liberals, in fact, we did have a GST holiday, not just on fuel, but a GST holiday at the end of 2024 into the beginning of 2025. Is this something that the Liberals should consider doing again?
Well, I noticed that he could just kind of take out his little speech, his thing that he put on his podiums, and kind of have a new placard with pretty much the same words that he likes to bring out.
Recycling is in.
He's recycling. So who knows? Without question, affordability is an issue, and this is going to be a shocker to a lot of people and to a lot of families who have to pay for gas to be able to get to their home, to their jobs, to be able to get their kids to school. And it's going to be tough. And as Peter said, it is not within the control of the Canadian government regarding the price of fuel globally. It is a situation that is going to take a lot of diplomacy and I'm not even sure what to actually resolve. But I think that affordability has been an issue that the Prime Minister has talked about from the very beginning. It's something that he took action on last week with respect to buying homes, and certainly recognizing that the added GST on new homes is something that they can provide relief with. He has the grocery relief that he actually announced a couple months ago, and also on the carbon price. So he's certainly someone who's very aware of that, and I know that he's watching this very closely. One would hope that it's not going to be for the full remainder of 2026. But I think that, there's no really bad idea. It's something that everyone kind of brings out as these circumstances unfortunately arise. But I'm not sure that that kind of broad stroke is something that's going to be coming from this government.
Andrew, other than the impact that it would have on government coffers, for example, is there a downside to doing this when people are even if they don't have to fill up that day, when they drive past the pump, they see the price? They might not be in the control of the government in terms of what happens in the Strait of Hormuz, but the taxes on the fuel, that is in the control of the government.
I mean, fuel taxes make up about 25 cents a litre in the country on average. That's federal and provincial. You know, the feds are about half of that. So obviously there is room to maneuver in terms of reducing that. Now, I mean, one of the things that needs to be understood out of that $5 or $6 billion or whatever the feds get out of the gas tax, about half of that goes back to municipalities for infrastructure already. So, you know, getting rid of that, you not only have the reduction of that $5 billion in your budget, you're also going to have to figure out where you come up with the extra $2 or $3 billion that you're already pumping out to municipalities that would need to continue. So it's not a small number, but when you look at it, the governments also do make money when oil prices go up. And I can tell you as a former energy and finance minister in Saskatchewan that when I was energy minister and oil was sitting down somewhere around $18 a barrel, it was a lot worse than when oil was at $100 a barrel when I was finance minister. And those coffers do fill up. And I think the provinces and the federal government certainly do have room to take advantage of that. The other thing that will be needing to be looked at within the federal fiscal situation is that as oil goes up, it does have a strangely positive impact on GDP, which means they ultimately will get more money. There's a risk of stagflation. I know everybody's talking about that. But I mean, this isn't a case that it's money pulled directly out. There are other sources that will flow back in. So the long and short of it is, yeah, I think the feds could probably afford to do something like this. We've seen provincial leadership in this area. I mean, Doug Ford had previously reduced the gas tax. Wab Kinew has taken action on it. And there's an opportunity here, I think, for the federal government to contribute to that also. The question is, we're a month into this now. How long does oil stay over, $100 WTI a barrel? And that's a big question. And do you assume if that were to drop back down, if the war ends, it drops back down, and I don't know what. The provinces, I think, are figuring oil would have been somewhere around $60, $65 a barrel. If it drops back down, how do you correct for that? When do you put those taxes back in? But, this is a very real issue for consumers. The estimates are it'll cost consumers somewhere around $500 a year if oil stays above $100 a barrel. That's a significant impact just on your gas bill alone.
Emily, is this from a strategic point of view, is this an opportunity for Pierre Poilievre to regain the affordability narrative by pushing for these kinds of things?
Of course, it's going to be a very popular idea. If you want to, cut taxes, usually people are, the general population think it's a good thing. I also think it's a trap for Mark Carney in the sense that it's always also unpopular where you put the tax back up. So it's smart of Pierre Poilievre in a way because it's like, look, it's a break, but there's never going to be a good timing for you to just raise the gas tax again necessarily in the near future. And so if you do that, you need to not just count it as something that's going to be politically feasible or easy for you to undo, especially because there's no timing to it. There's also the geopolitical aspect of, Canada's not the only country impacted by this. It's obviously impacting American consumers and consumers all around the world and consumers in Europe. And this is essentially adding pressure on Donald Trump to stop the war that he started and with the consequences that it has. And so there's also the dilemma of if all, for example, Canada, Europe, the US, everybody's globally is trying to lower their taxes. Aren't we making Donald Trump's war more affordable and feasible and decreasing the political and diplomatic pressure that is now in the White House? And B, are we also losing government revenues in a way that makes the increased profits of oil companies also more sustainable? And that is something that we've seen in many other cases of inflation recently, where, for example, in food, the price go up, but they don't go back down. And we sort of have that increased margin of profits that become essentially entrenched in what is normalized for oil companies to have as a cut. So would we just be, helping the oil companies make more profit and benefit from the war by decreasing taxes in a way that has a long-term effect on revenues? Now, everything that has just said that I have just said is a lot more complex to explain than just, axe the tax and have more money in your budget at the end of the month. And so it's making it very hard as an argument to sell. But to your question about strategy and geopolitical impact, I don't think I'm wrong.
Okay, so Michelle, you did mention that there's other affordability measures that the government has brought in, and in fact, Mark Carney alluded to those when he was asked about any concern he had over oil prices. But under the vein of what have you done for me lately, is there a risk to appearing out of touch or unsympathetic if more is not done as these prices stay at this level?
Well, I think that, the past government under Prime Minister Trudeau, they did, they felt it when they didn't seem empathetic, when they didn't seem in touch. And so, yeah, there is that risk. It's going to be very important that, the Prime Minister and his ministers communicate through this and kind of talk to some of the broader impacts. But as Andrew said, and I think, and Peter said as well, like, we don't know when this is going to be over. We are hoping it's going to be over soon. I would like to think, as Emily said, that Donald Trump is actually facing some pressure domestically. And certainly gas prices are a part of that domestic one. I'm not sure if he cares how much the gas is in Canada, but certainly in the US, I would hope that is going to in some way get him to go. Realistically, solving that and being a part of any kind of diplomatic solution for what happens after this so-called war, this war is over, because it's not just going to go back to what it was overnight. And I think that's another important role that Canada has to play.
Well, speaking of that, Peter, in terms of, you've discussed that, it's not like Canada can be the one to open up the Strait of Hormuz, but it is obviously, we understand we've been reporting in conversations with other countries because the U.S. has said now, or the president has said, okay, it's up to you guys to figure out how to reopen that. And I'm wondering if you think that Canada can play some kind of leadership role, once that becomes the main target is trying to reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, Karina, to say that the president of the United States is unpredictable and may contradict himself again tomorrow is an understatement. And, while he has talked about talks with Iran, Iran has denied that that's even happening. And there are, thousands of bombs still dropping over Iran and talk of even putting troops on the ground as far as the island of Carrig in the Straits of Hormuz. So is there something Canada can do? I mean, short of having some sort of maritime presence, which I think the president had alluded to some time ago, and there were no takers, being part of the discussions of some 40 countries that I think are calling for a solution to the sole issue of the Straits of Hormuz and calling for diplomatic discussions, sure, Canada could very well take part in this. There is very little appetite, if any appetite, in the country for Canada to even, contemplate being there in any meaningful sense. That is, to have a naval ship join in an effort to keep those straits, or to open up those straits, I should say. But, parenthetic to this, I can't help but imagine the place that Canada would find itself had we built pipelines, or were we actually moving forward with this beyond, signing memorandums. That's not to suggest that, we want to be predatory in the face of a spike in the price of oil and gas, but it sure brings focus here back home on the opportunity for Canada to be an exporter, a safe, ethical producer of oil and gas into the world market at world prices that would have massive impact in terms of the revenues that would be flowing into our country. And, just a bit, on the subject of what are they doing in other places, other countries have in fact entertained this and gone ahead with dropping taxes, excise taxes and consumer taxes. And it is noteworthy. I mean, Michelle alluded to it. Yes, the price is up in the United States, but it's actually cheaper to fill your tank in the United States than it is in Canada. I know people in New Brunswick drive across the border to fill their tanks these
Absolutely.
days.
Although, I mean, part of that is taxes, part of that is also refinery capability. But you did provide a good segue just for very quick final thoughts from Andrew and Emily on this. I do want to ask about the MOU with Alberta, that we're now having delays in some of the deadlines that they had set. What does that say about Canada's ability to step up on oil production in this world where that's where the demand is? Really quickly from you, Andrew, first.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, some of this is businesses are going to have to see that there is a sustained business case to invest. Now, that can be driven either by the current environment or, as Emily suggested, there is the possibility of windfall taxes being put on that could, in fact, be eased if they are prepared to make those kind of investments. Interesting today to see that finally Irving has decided that they're going to start buying Canadian oil out of Newfoundland rather than importing from Saudi Arabia. I mean, they've been importing from Saudi Arabia for, 30 years. And all of a sudden now they've finally decided that because of the business risks associated with it, they're better going and getting that oil from Newfoundland. Well, that makes lots of sense. If more businesses follow that kind of investment strategy in Canada, maybe the pipelines do start to make more sense both east-west and potentially then offshore.
Okay, Emily, quickly, last thoughts from you.
Well, it's about offer and demand, basically. All the solutions that we've been discussing so far is about assuming that Canadians are having the cars that they have and that they need to be filled, and that we need to figure out a way to either have more oil or have those prices go down. When you were talking about solutions, when it comes to Europe and the way they've been dealing with a similar situation with the war in Russia, the solution has been more on the side of increasing the energy transition and changing people's way of consuming energy and transportation in a way that also makes life more affordable for people. And I think which way our political imagination swings tells us more about where Canada stands than it tells us about the price of gas or the war in Iran.
Okay, thanks. The Conservatives have another demand of the government. They want to see the high-speed rail project planned to link Toronto and Quebec City cancelled.
We think that it's a waste of money. It's going to drive up the cost of living. Taxes are going to be higher. It will ruin communities, many of whom will see the train tear apart land, even though the local residents will not be able to use it, and because the stations are not anywhere close to where they live.
You can see here the proposed routes for that train. The project is estimated to cost between $60 to $90 billion. It is expected to take passengers from Montreal to Toronto in 3 hours. The power panel is still here and back to talk about this. Emily Nicolas, Andrew Thompson, Peter MacKay, and Michelle Cadario. So, Peter, the Conservatives once were on board, no pun intended, with high-speed rail. What changed?
Probably the price and the discussion around the delays in building a project and infrastructure investment of this size and scope. It is also, I suppose, there's a political calculus here. This is clearly going to be more appealing to people who are along the route between Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa. And so that decision, we've seen this so many times when it comes to massive procurements, that they don't come in on budget and they don't come in on time. And canceling projects and procurement, we saw it with the F-35, we saw it with helicopters. It happens, and it becomes a sort of a harbinger of, one party saying, we will use that money for other purposes. And you saw Poilievre in his discussion talking about ways that that you can save money for Canadians as opposed to continue to build a massive deficit. And Emily will recall the saga around Maribel. So transportation has a history when it comes to these big investments. And I think Pierre Poilievre, again, is working from the calculus that other parts of the country won't be impressed, that something that isn't going to be even available for use for many years to come. He's talked about the negative impact on certain municipalities, on agricultural land. All of this is a bit of a familiar refrain. And it's a big wish. It's people talk about the vision piece. It took Canadians 4 years to build the Canada Pacific rail line. We're talking, more than a decade to get this done. Obviously, technology, high speed. There's a lot of uncertainty around it. My grandmother had an expression. She said, if wishes were horses, then beggars would ride. I don't see this project as having broad appeal.
Michelle, there has been now a lot of talk about sort of an urban-rural divide on this project, especially since people in rural areas who might see their land actually expropriated don't feel that they will actually benefit from the project the way that those in urban areas would, particularly Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa. How does the Liberal government explain the benefit of this project to those who don't think that they're going to benefit?
Well, first of all, it's quite ironic that he's now the king of NIMBYism and has no concern whatsoever about all these pipelines that don't even have proponents behind it and just expropriating land and doing whatever you want. So beyond that hypocrisy, these are thousands of jobs, and this is about building and putting people to work. We're the only G7 country, if not the only OECD country, that doesn't have a high-speed rail, right? This is about fueling the economy. And yes, it is where the most of the population is. And I will say that my folks probably in Dryden, Ontario, do not care probably all that much about that, fair ball. But this is something that actually will help to stimulate the economy, not just the thousands of jobs to actually build it, but also about being able to move people and to have other kinds of opportunities to be able to get from one place to another. It sure takes a lot more than 3 hours for us to fly from Ottawa to Toronto these days, if you count in all the travel time, standing in lines, and all that kind of thing. So, I think that it will be actually quite popular. I would presume that they would be working towards an economic and feasible thing. But if you don't think big, you're never going to build anything. And, I think that the Prime Minister is trying to absolutely shake that up. And I'm actually quite surprised that he's going against what was in his party's platform. And now all of a sudden is kind of an anti-growth guy.
Andrew, part of Poilievre's reasoning when he's explained it to the public is, on one hand, he's concerned about rural property owners who are concerned about their land being expropriated, but on the other hand, he also calls it a pie-in-the-sky project. What do you think the real reason is here?
Yeah, this is obviously a property rights issue for him. They're trying to distill this issue back down to something that fits into a 3-word slogan and are forgetting kind of what the bigger pieces of this are. It's a bit rich coming from a guy who's complained for the last how many years that Canada can't do big things, and all of a sudden now we can't do big things. And this isn't even that big of a thing. Every other major industrialized country in Europe has some kind of high-speed rail in it. The fact that this we can't connect 2 of our biggest cities, if you count in Ottawa, 3 of the 4 biggest cities in the country, can't get connected by a high-speed rail. At the same time that Poilievre and the Tories are talking about pushing for more air expansion, paving more of Lake Ontario in order to expand the airport downtown, constantly talking about provincially building more highways to accommodate the traffic that's sitting on it. We need to find alternate means of dealing with the fact that these big cities, which are big GDP producers, a reminder, Toronto itself generates about as much GDP in the country as the province of Alberta does. So, these are not small, just kind of urban-rural clashes. This is really about economic infrastructure, and it's about making sure you're looking at growth. But to me, I find this whole argument that 3 weeks ago when they were voting on the budget, the Tories were in favor of it. Now, all of a sudden, they're against it because of property rights. But at the same time, of course, they're going to stomp on the property rights of anybody that complains about the pipelines in BC. This is just the crassest type of politics that really just says that the Conservatives under Poilievre have slipped back, and whatever this last makeover was supposed to do has really been undone.
Emily, the Prime Minister has floated the idea of designating this project one of national interest. Do you think that could hurt or help the project?
I think it could help. I'm just smiling. I've been smiling this whole segment just because we ended the last one on the fact that, which way we swing is about where Canada's political imagination is. And this is exactly it. We're talking about lowering the price of gas because people can't afford their cars. And here is a big project that is about people having not to rely on their car. And we're not sure if it's a good idea that we should afford it. This is exactly what we were talking about. How many people have to go back and forth for either job or family? just between Quebec City and Montreal, where there is not really a solid alternative. The Highway 20 in Quebec is just filled with people going back and forth between the two major cities in the province, and that would be completely avoided if there was a high-speed rail. Same thing between Montreal and Toronto. By rail is medieval at best when it comes to the quality of its service. There was just a report that was put forward just a couple of weeks ago on the fact that it's even a problem how many delays there has been, that you cannot know if you're going to get to Montreal and Toronto in time, or Ottawa if you're trying to get between those three cities using by rail. And so what happens is that people rely on plane. And when it comes to Canada's gas emission, just the fact that between the largest cities in the country, most of the major cities in the country, so many of the people who are traveling for essentially business reason all the time have to fly, makes it a huge cost to our climate target, but it's also a huge cost to the companies themselves. The travel budget that we have normalized in this country, because we live in a medieval era when it comes to transportation between our big cities, is completely ludicrous. And I think that is perhaps the argument that the Conservatives should hear, is that it's basically in terms of profit and even productivity, the fact that we have to rely on airplanes to travel within central Canada makes no business sense at all, on top of being not good for even local tourism or for even Canadian unity between Quebec and Ontario. I think if people could go to Toronto very fast, we would have a very big bridge between the two solitudes that don't exist now. And so the political, the economic, the climate reasons for building this are so high. And when you look at Europe and the way that the European Union exists, in part because you have those kind of means of transportation, I'm just really astonished that this is even in conversation.
Peter, crass politics or not, do you think that, whether you believe it's a double standard or not, that will be a problem for Pierre Poilievre, that he seems fine with land possibly being seized for a pipeline, but not for a rail line?
Well, I think it's an issue in some ways of staging. If we're able to pay for these big things, building an energy corridor, a pipeline across the country that starts to generate revenue to pay for things like transportation infrastructure, our military, and more, seems to be a sensible way to go about it. I mean, the price tag, the range of price here is between $60 and $90 billion. Well, that's smack dab in the middle of where the current annual deficit, or at least this year's deficit, lands. And so that's an issue. And there's also the issue of, I hate to say it, but Canada's ability to build these things. We just saw a light rail, obviously a different kettle of fish here, but look at how that went for the city of Ottawa. I mean, I hate to point that out, but this is an engineering feat to build a high-speed rail. It's not been done in Canada, as it's been alluded to. Look, as I said, I would love to see this happen. It's something that is a bit of an embarrassment and a black eye for Canada, that we don't have this type of modern infrastructure. But we have not proven to be quite, frankly, proficient at building a project like this. We haven't built one of this size and this scope since, the 1880s.
Super brief, Michelle. In terms of the risk to the government, if we do start to see cost overruns, or it does look like this is not going according to plan, what is the risk there?
Well, I think that they'll be judged as it kind of goes on. But it's not an excuse just because we say we haven't done it since the 1880s to not do it today. Like, honest to God, do we just give up on everything? I don't even understand why we would suggest that. Like, if we want to be a country that knows how to build, if we want to actually develop the expertise, develop the companies that can actually be the suppliers to it, and all the other ancillary kind of benefits that can come along with this, this is an opportunity. And yeah, it's a lot of money, but it's going into the Canadian economy. It's not going, it's not going overseas. It's a lot of jobs, and I think it's a bold investment. Good on the government for wanting to do it.
Andrew, really quickly, last word to you.
Yeah, I mean, this should have been done 10 years ago when it was first promised by the Trudeau government. Obviously, foot dragging on it has driven up costs. It's not going to get cheaper 10 years from now. and the demand is still going to be there. And at some point, we need to do these kind of major national infrastructure projects. There's all sorts of good reasons from an economic standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, from a commuting standpoint, in terms of reducing the number of vehicles that are currently congesting and driving down productivity within the major cities. All of these are reasons to take a look at this kind of a project. I agree that they need to actually prove that they can deliver on it. And that's one thing that this government, and frankly the previous government, were not particularly good at, which is actually managing those costs. If they can do that, if they can demonstrate that, then this project absolutely makes sense.
Well, thank you, everyone, for your thoughts. That's the Power Panel: Emily Nicolas, Andrew Thompson, Peter MacKay, and Michelle Cadario.